Welcome to the Ancient Way. I'm James.
I'm Marlia.
We have with us Dr. Judd. You're the first guest to be on here three times. So
Honor.
welcome.
Welcome to the
Welcome.
party.
We have some specific topics I wanted to go over today. And I will preface, I've been prefacing some of these episodes with guests with dreams. So I will sum this up. I have my life over the past few months or so, I've experienced some, I would say, witchy circumstances and situations with people. Really, and I'm in this pivot point of I'm kind of in a twilight zone, and I had the option to choose fear or God, kind of what he says or what the world is saying, which is kind of a lot of accusation and things like that. So over the course of the past couple of weeks, in my workplace, I had a bat like flying through the building the other day. I had a weird situation with a person, and then this bat just shows up out of nowhere and is flying through the building. I'm thinking, oh, that's weird. So like 2 nights later, I have a dream. And in this dream, I'm in this academic like library, and there's relics everywhere. And it's like this wellspring of like knowledge and archaeology. And there's this giant bat in this library, and I'm hunting it. And so I know it's up in the belfry somewhere, right? And I'm looking for like answers in this library, and I don't even know where to start. Well, in this dream, you show up, and you're like the curator of all of these things here. So I'm like, oh, that's interesting. But you were having like fun, almost like a teenager or something. Like it was your wheelhouse.
Yeah, pretty much. That's
Yeah.
what would, if that scenario played out, that's what would happen.
That's what it would be. And I'm like confused looking for stuff. So I woke up and I'm like, okay, there's something here. Obviously, we always talk about dreams, write them down, and the Lord speaks through them. And I thought, what's the point of this dream? And I don't have full understanding in this bat stuff, interested in it. But I felt like, hey, why don't you consult Jedi Master Judd? It's his wheelhouse. And so I'm like, yeah, that's what we're here for. It's kind of like the body of Christ. Like we all have these specific strengths. And I'm like, yeah, I bet we should consult him on it. So there's that, the bat. And then another thing, I don't want to go into too many details, but there, upon my arrival here, there was all of this octopus leviathan imagery here on like pillows and art on the wall. And it was all like this. To me, it felt constrictive. There was this pillow, and it had a octopus like pulling a ship under the water, and it felt that way when you were here, or when you walk into the building and stuff. So I kind of like snuffed that stuff out, and I'm like, well, let's replace this pillow with like a lion. Let's get this thing healthy and where it feels free. But I've experienced some. It's almost like a spirit in the form of like an octopus is the best way I can put it. And so I'm curious if there's what the history is behind octopus, leviathan, these giant, the kraken, these creatures that like live in the darkness under the water in the depths of the ocean. So those are my two. To sum it up, what is the deal with like bats as like an omen, or like what is the origins of bats, even black cats, these like witchcraft associated things?
Well, in the context of witchcraft, particularly of the satanic Luciferian variety, animal familiars have long been associated with not just the European tradition of witchcraft, but witchcraft traditions all around the world. But in our direct cultural inheritance in the West, those familiars were thought to be demons in animal form of some type or another, and typically they were things like black cats and or crows or owls or something of that sort, something that was never very far from either the domestic or the kind of farmstead sphere. And so there's that element of it. That in and of itself is wrapped up in much older
Mm-hmm.
practices of um, beliefs, such as totemism. A totem is usually, when anybody hears the word totem, they think of the iconic totem poles
Mm-hmm.
in, say, the Northwest Pacific. And totems are the actual spirit animal consulted within those animistic traditions.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and so they're often, you know, uh, uh, petroglyphs of them, and effigies, and fetishes, and the aforementioned totem pole. Their
Interesting.
imagery shows up in all kinds of things, and they're as varied as, you know, technically they could be any animal within the environment of a given culture. So there's
Mm.
immense variety in the totemistic practices around the world, and they span the breadth of not only the planet but also time. So these are traditions that are rooted in prehistory, but there are even still societies today, let's say, that are non-industrial or non-literate, that still practice those kinds of beliefs.
Mm. The
But
spirit animal thing is interesting. Um, and I want to kind of touch on that a little bit. Would that be, because that's a conversation I had with a fella that just came in off the streets, came in with his question asking me, like, what is your spirit animal? And I'm like, I don't have a spirit animal. But what is really interesting is he told me his, and he said, and I've had this history with the octopus, right? Here he goes, he tells me, he says, I'm an octopus, and he sticks his arms out and he tells me why he's an octopus. Is the, and it was the weirdest situation. It's one of those things that's unexpected, but it's kind of expected. It's
Mhm,
there to disrupt and cause, stir up stuff.
mhm.
But is there, when it comes to like spirit animal, is that like a prerequisite to kind of like werewolves? Or like, I know some cultures, don't they attempt to embody themselves with the spirit of an animal? They like even act like it.
Certainly. Yeah, it certainly can be. Um, some some traditions less of an articulated witchcraft, I would say, but in some, uh, a definite sense of right is in place, such as the berserkers in Norse
Mm-hmm.
tradition. Certainly come to mind.
Interesting.
They would the name berserker actually means bearskin, because they
Hmm.
would bear skins or wolf pelts to take on the ferocity and the strength of those animals. And interestingly enough, the like I say, the articulation of the witchcraft is very much to the fore here, because they're actually utilizing a hallucinogen to bring this effect on.
Hmm.
Uh, Sort of brings us right to the threshold of werewolfism. But in the case of the berserkers, they would ingest a hallucinogenic mushroom,
Hmm.
and without getting too graphic, they would then urinate and then drink the
Yeah.
high concentrated hallucinogens that were in them.
Wow.
And this was to put them into the battle frenzy necessary for, whatever raid or campaign they were going on.
Interesting. That sounds like one of those secret knowledge tactics. That sounds like a very demonic tactic. Like, how do you learn how to do that?
Well,
Interesting.
we're talking about not just the typical dark age era medieval Viking, but these are Norse traditions that are,
Hmm.
for all intents and purposes, are in Norse, that go back to Norse prehistory. So there's a
Mm.
shamanistic
Yeah.
element.
Hmm.
And so you had this, a shaman is they're like a part-time religious official, because they're also the doctor, or the healer for
Hmm.
but they're these spiritual go-betweens, and so
Hmm.
that knowledge was derived from the mechanics of whatever the shamans and those old proto-Norse cultures were doing to actually come up with this. And of course, although they're not necessarily always used for battle practices, those kinds of hallucinogens are ingested in numerous traditions around the world where people interact with the supernatural.
Hmm.
Oh yeah. People do that at Burning Man all the time.
People do that at Burning Man,
Yeah.
yes.
Doctors are like modern day shamans. I was thinking about that too. The priests of well being. Sorry, that's
Yeah, I mean,
interesting.
our pre-recording conversation.
Yeah,
it is pharmakia. It is
pharmakeia.
witchcraft.
Yeah,
Oh yeah.
it is.
Can we kind of dive into Leviathan and you kind of share your wheelhouse on all that? Kind of what we were talking before.
Yeah. Was that pun intended?
Yes.
Dive into Leviathan. Yeah,
You're welcome.
the Leviathan is a creature that is probably familiar to most of your listeners. Um, if you're a Bible reader of any kind, you're going to run across Leviathan, and it in the West Semitic languages, it means like the writhing serpent,
Hmm.
essentially. Consequently, the land of Bashan in northern Israel, which is so closely associated with Og and the Amorite giants,
Hmm.
that word Bashan is essentially it's the Ugaritic variation of the Hebrew / Aramaic Leviathan, the
Oh.
LTN, except in Ugaritic it's Batan, hence
Hmm.
Bashan. It
Yeah.
literally means the land of the serpent.
Wow.
Hmm.
And so,
Interesting.
yeah, Leviathan is this depending on who you read, some people will say that this is one of the aquatic dinosaurs or something. But Leviathan is actually this chaos dragon that shows up in the mythologies of not just the ancient Near East, but all over the world.
Hmm.
Uh, in fact, uh, Leviathan is the sort of archetypal sea serpent or chaos dragon, because the sea in antiquity in particular, but even a jutting up to recent centuries, the sea has always symbolized chaos. It's always symbolized the unpredictable, and so the sea
Hmm.
serpent, chaos dragon, they're all really the same blueprint. But they show up in places like Mesopotamia. Tiamat is the chaos dragon. You have the Typhon in Greek mythology, who was sort of the chaos monster there. The Midgard serpent in Norse mythology. Um, there's really a laundry list of these kinds of variations on a theme that show up, and the Leviathan is one of those. And I would say that Leviathan is not confined to just the explicit renderings that we find in books like Job.
Hmm.
Uh, Leviathan shows up, but um, it's quite probable that Leviathan is right there before the creation in Genesis 1, because you have the earth being uh, void and without form. In Hebrew, the tohu and the bohu. The tohu is actually a derivative of the Akkadian Sumerian Tiamat that we mentioned just a moment ago, the chaos dragon. And so that spirit of chaos was doing battle with the Almighty within the first few verses of the first chapter of the Bible.
Hmm. Yeah.
This this is not just an archaic entity or beast; it is the archaic entity.
Hmm.
Or um, And this is something that's on my mind fairly regularly because Doug Van Dorn and I are actually writing a book on the Serpent Mound of Bashan.
Hmm.
So this stuff is still pretty fresh to me. What's what's so interesting about the Leviathan or the Chaos Dragon is that amongst other things, it it shows up as particularly in the Old Testament in the Hebrew, it shows up as cursed.
Mm.
Uh, Basically, the same spelling, RHB. You know, the consonants are there. The vowel markings came much later in Hebrew,
Hmm.
and so it occurred to me that um, the old, long before Caesarea Philippi or Paneas was a Greco-Roman metropolis. It was just a shrine site on the east-west thoroughfare through that region, basically on the road to Damascus.
Hmm.
As people going far back into antiquity and probably prehistory understood that there was a kind of auspiciousness about this place. Certainly, we know that from its proximity to Mount Hermon and all of
Hmm.
the events that are associated with that. But before that region was known as the Paneon or Paneas, the haunt of Pan, it was known as Beth Rahab, the house of the cursed.
Hmm.
Mm.
Uh, and there's a valley that runs adjacent to Mount Hermon through the very southern edges of the Anti-Lebanon Mountains called Beth Rahab. And this valley looks like a meandering, writhing serpent.
Hmm. Interesting.
Wow.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Have you made any kind of connection between like well, or just like the Serpent Mound that's in it Ohio or something like that? Are those
Yeah,
similar?
yes. Doug and I are finding. I don't want to let too much of the cat out of the bag since we're still.
Sorry.
That's okay. That was an intended pun too, I suppose, since we're. But there is a connection because a lot of not just the Serpent Mound in Ohio, but there are numerous other Serpent Mounds as well,
Mm-hmm.
scattered.
Yeah.
And they all seem to have a very similar alignment. The solstices, in
That's what I was
conjunction
curious.
curves in their writhing tails. Um, yeah, they all share this connection in terms of alignment, which a couple of times that occurring, you might think, well, they were just star watchers, but when you find numerous, you know, varieties of them and similar alignments, it
Yeah.
becomes less and less likely that it's a coincidence that they all have similar elements.
That's so cool.
Yeah, for sure.
There's an archaeoastronomy um, associated with not just the Serpent Mound in Bashan, but the Serpent Mounds all over the world.
Hmm.
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 That's incredible. So, could you kind of go into like Leviathan and kind of the historical context of even how the Second Temple period Jews or whatever like would interact with Leviathan or like kind of their concept of it? Um, do they stay
Sure.
away from it? Kind of in terms of
Well,
witchcraft.
yeah, I mean there were all kinds. I mean, if you look at the Essenic literature from the Second Temple period, there are all kinds of not not only Leviathan, but there are all kinds of proscriptions against communing with these sorts of things. And of course, even the Jews of that period inherit the older traditions, the older proscriptions from the Levitical laws, where God says, in a general way, not to converse or concourse or have anything to do with these other spirits, whether they're the spirits of the the Elohim,
Hmm.
or the human did. Um, that's interesting too, because there's kind of, Sheol, from what we can tell, was at least a waiting cell for faithful Jews, in addition to those that were yet to be judged for not holding up their end of the law. But those laws are interesting, because they acknowledge even though they prohibit, that's kind of a no-brainer. Okay, yeah, we're worshiping Yahweh. Probably a good idea not to traffic with these other spirits.
Yeah.
Um, on the surface, yeah, they're prohibitions, but they also acknowledge the reality and the possibility of
Hmm.
those things,
Mm-hmm.
fallen Elohim and the human dead as well, which is all the rage uh, today on some of the frontiers of ghost hunting.
Mm.
It In some cases it sort of skirts the cops, but in others it's downright necromancy,
Yeah.
Mm.
which
Yeah.
is no for, you know not because it wouldn't be interesting, but it's just mortally dangerous.
Yeah. Oh yeah. There's a lot more of it that goes on around here too
Hmm.
that is just brushed under the rug. They don't want to tell people about it, but it's heavy. I mean, there's a lot of it.
Hmm.
Well, that makes me think of one thing too, is like him pushing that point home of like, don't mess with this stuff. And of course, back then it was so prevalent and dangerous and hidden, and probably just everywhere. Was it after Jericho when somebody took a shroud? Was it some kind of a shroud and they kept it? I can't remember the story, but it
Yeah.
was basically something that was cursed. It had something on it. Um,
Yeah, because he told him to devote everything to destruction, and
he
then
kept
like one
something.
guy kept something and hid it under his like buried it,
Yeah,
and then they cast lots to find out who it was, and it was him
it was him. Yeah, and it didn't
and
end
his whole
well.
family.
Yes, right. But just the dangers of these things, even these objects. And that's
Yeah.
another interesting one too, is the objects themselves. It's like even like Dr. Michael Heiser in the chapter with naming the Syrian, like the dirt holding some sort of significance. And then even like Paul with the handkerchief, like almost being able to bless or like curse objects. That's another interesting one.
Mm-hmm.
The octopus man that I had an encounter with, I'm not sure if this is his or not, but that there was a bracelet that was left here. I've had things that have been left here. One of them, it was a fiction book, and it's probably pretty good, but it's called in German Panther Spirit,
Hmm.
and it was a book that I just found on the shelf here. I don't know where it came from, but it has a skeleton in a black tank, and it says Panther Spirit in German on it.
Hmm.
And it's not, nothing's come happened from it, but it's interesting. I'm like, I don't know how that got here, but it speaks very specifically to things that I've had encounters with.
Hmm.
Um, and witches do that. They'll
Yeah.
leave, dolls and cursed objects and things like that.
Certainly.
Um, and one in particular, I'm sorry, I'm going on a rabbit trail. This is a question. I don't want to lose it. Was Goliath's sword, was there some sort of like magical significance to his sword that you know of?
I don't think so.
Okay.
My first inclination is that it was handy. It
Yeah.
was that. And so, David may not have even been thinking about, like, he may not even have been thinking about this when he did it, but um, I'm sure this was all part of God's plan. That's funny. Sometimes we don't even know when we're doing something. We don't know the magnitude of what God happens to be doing at the time, which is sort of the beauty of the whole thing.
Yeah.
Uh,
Hmm.
all glory to Him. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, my sense of it is that it was a matter um of you know you got this almost 10-foot tall guy. Musculature in his neck is going to be hard. You're going to need a sword to hack through his neck, or you're going to be there all day, basically.
Yeah.
So that's my sense of it. But in terms of its symbology, this, first of all, the giant being filled by a sling,
Yeah.
which is a dangerous weapon,
Oh yeah.
but it's the defensive weapon, the offensive weapon of a shepherd,
Mhm.
which has all, again, all kinds of Christological symbology.
Oh yeah.
Um, and so you've got this kid who's annoying everybody else and says that get out of the way. I can do this because our God's greater, and he just does it. So not only Goliath, but all of the Philistines that had hired him and his brothers were
Yeah.
humiliated because of it. But I don't sense that there's any sort of magical, innate magical quality to the sword. Now, if
Okay.
it, who knows what happened to it? It's probably dust now.
Yeah.
But it would also not have been uncommon for these roving Canaanite priests and priestesses who perform these kinds of necromantic rites to pick them up and use them as a talisman or something like that.
Yeah. Because there was one particular scripture is when David was fleeing, and I can't remember, but it mentions the sword, and it says something like it was like no other. There was something about it, and I was fascinated with it, and I researched it. Google didn't come to anything, but I was interested in that. And then, is it not true? Did David? He picked like a stone for each brother too, right?
Yeah, he picked up
That's
5
pretty
stones.
intense.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, I'm going to hit each one of them on the first go.
Yep.
Yeah.
He must have been a dead eye with that sling, and of course he would have had no shortage of practice with it.
Yeah.
David lived in a time when the West Asian lion was still around, so he had to tussle with all kinds of wild animals, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
What's the West Asian lion? I've never heard of this.
The West Asian lion is a short-maned cousin of the African lion,
Hmm.
and it's you can find it in the iconography of the ancient Near East. Basically, hunting was an elite sport in the ancient Near East, and so
Hmm.
there are all bas reliefs of hunting scenes, hunting these West Asian lions. There's even a statue of Gilgamesh, where an iconic one where he's clutching a lion
Mm-hmm.
underneath his hand, underneath his arm. That's a West Asian lion.
Hmm. Yeah, he's clutching it like it's a pet cat or something. I mean, just like holding it with one arm, right?
Mm-hmm.
I ain't never seen that.
You haven't the statues and the
Wow.
pictures? Oh yeah.
That is crazy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is fascinating.
So kind of with, all of these like wild creatures and wild beasts and kind of whatever, it was in Ephesus, right? That there was a certain goddess that everybody was like worshiping. What wasn't like Diana or something like that? Do you know who I'm talking about?
Yes, there were temples to Aphrodite and to Artemis, and Diana would have been the analog to um, Diana would have been the Roman analog to Artemis. But I think it's the Temple of Venus. I think it's the Aphrodite temple. That's
Oh,
the
okay.
yeah.
Hmm.
Okay. So I was going to ask you in terms of like relating to that and kind of like their vein in terms of like witchcraft and engaging with that.
Mm-hmm.
What would that look like? Because I wasn't that when he was like, "Hey, don't shave your heads. Like women don't shave your heads because they're prophetess. They were
Mm-hmm.
shaving their heads." Is that correct? Michael Heiser.
To entice the angels or something.
Yeah, to entice the angels.
Yeah, I saw him. I've seen a meme going around where Paul says that and adds no commentary or something to it. He just says, "Don't cut, don't uncover your heads because of the angels," and leaves
Yeah.
it at. Yeah, and there's a really great episode where Mike breaks that down of the Survival podcast, and where he goes into, you know, some of the procreative powers or generative powers are thought to have been in the hair.
That's right.
I was just curious, like them engaging in that vein, right? That I don't know why I thought of Ephesus, but I did. But then, you know, also the traditions of like engaging with Leviathan. Is it the same kind of worship, or was like Leviathan more like fear because of the chaos? Or were they actually like sacrificing to Leviathan?
Leviathan or Yom in the Ugaritic tradition, or whoever he shows up to, it was certainly something to be placated. There were certain rites, but public paganism and private sphere paganism were interrelated, but they were different species of religious practice. Witchcraft tends to fall into the category of the latter, because typically witches are the cultural they're anathema to the cultural norm of whatever society that they're in. And so you know, we're not talking about the neo-pagans or whatever. That's an entire other that's a whole other show. But the you know, the anthropological definition of witchcraft turns out to be very congruent with the biblical definition of witchcraft, that they're practicing something anathema, that's counter, that's unnatural to what the accepted norm is. And so witches of, you know, whatever the culturally appropriate name, culturally specific name for witches, they're generally solitary practitioners that hire their services out, you know, at a price. The witch of Endor in the Old Testament is a perfect example of these roving priests and priestesses that I was talking about. They practice a kind of witchcraft because they're not part of, let's say, like a temple infrastructure where you've got, you know, regimented times for rituals and whatnot, and there's a whole calendar and honorarium, if you will, of things that are always going on in that temple. That's a public sphere. Those are the kinds of things you would have seen at the temples to Aphrodite and the temple to Artemis. Yeah, witchcraft is it's paganism, but it's within a different scope, and that's sort of, you run into that a lot in Christian Middle Earth that we're all in right now, that Mike Heiser used to tell us we were all in. You run into the blurring of those lines, but there are differences that should be better articulated. I think in a conversation about paganism and witchcraft, because they are related, but they're two different sort of spiritual trajectories.
It's very interesting.
Yeah, and witchcraft is like a vast, just in different forms of it. And like, I had a situation a couple of years ago. I was getting my hair cut, and the town I'm from is like witchcraft, one of the witchcraft capitals of like the country. It's crazy, the stories.
Which
but
town?
I found Athens, Texas.
Okay,
it's fascinating.
Town that works too.
Do what?
Which town? WHICCH and WITCH.
Yeah, which town? That's great. This is the Halloween episode now.
For real.
But I found myself
loaded with puns.
With a book. Yeah.
You're killing it.
You are killing it. I'm jealous.
I started it, you finished it.
I'm not that sharp. It takes me a long time to pick up on it. Goes right over my head.
He's still learning to read.
Yeah, I'm still learning to read. I am.
Aren't we all?
Speaking of reading, though, I found this book. There's this witch family in this town, and they have a book of all these secrets and stuff, and it details like even the origins of like Fahrenheit and Celsius are like rooted in witchcraft. And even if you even look at words, you know, like I guess the core of the word, like spelling and cursive, is like spell and curse, and like writing something in order to manipulate somebody into a different point of view, or with the intent of manipulation. So there's like, it's almost as if witchcraft people can operate in it
Mhm.
unbeknownst to them of like, yeah, I mean, and I find myself in even meetings where people are trying to, in secret, meet with somebody else and garner them to their side and build a reputation so that they can usurp something later on.
Mhm.
Just like real tactical, formulaic,
Mhm.
and manipulative. Which I mean, I'm pretty sure that's a form of it, and I would say they, especially in like from what I've read, Eastern tradition, they specialize in manipulation tactics. But
Yeah, well, it's really just, I mean, just like the demonic takes everything that's good and makes it
mhm,
counterfeit.
yeah,
God is forever talking about through his prophets uh, and apostles and authors of the books of the Bible. He's forever talking about the power of the word. You
mhm,
know,
Mm-hmm.
the New Testament talks so much so that the New Testament talks about Jesus being the word made flesh, particularly John.
yeah,
Uh, power of life and death is in the tongue.
mhm,
Very true. It can edify and build up, or it can kill and tear down.
yeah,
It just so happens that the enemy is more interested in the latter, and certainly you can do that through words, through language. I wrote a paper a couple of years ago about um, the relationship between words like um, Rabbah, which is king in Akkadian and Sumerian, the Rapha of the Ugaritic tradition, and the Rephaim
mm,
in the Bible. Those are all related words. They deal with the dead ancestor kings in the underworld.
mhm,
And it just so happens that an astounding number, I'm talking about dozens of words in Eurasian languages for king and ruler, begin with an R and a vowel.
mm,
Uh, just as these words from the Proto-Semitic and the Proto-Indo-European world, uh, you know, illustrate. And they spread over the Eurasian continent. And so I think that this is hard evidence, and not to put too fine a point on it, damning evidence insofar as that the Watchers and their early Neolithic, forebears, the Rephaim, were clearly instrumental in cultural engineering. There are other
mhm,
work working on to do, looking at those linguistic ties, because that's what I do. I'm an anthropologist and a historian. Uh,
yeah,
but it's very clear that the weaponization of language took place very early on in our cultural development, um, and at the very dawn of prehistoric civilization.
yeah,
Uh, that all, I think, is by design, and that is a kind of witchcraft in and of itself.
mhm,
Uh, and you don't even really have to be a linguist or any sort of specialist like that to see the weaponization of language taking place right in
Mm.
front of us.
oh yeah, yeah,
Uh, where
all over
people
the
are
place.
people are people get their own pronouns now. That's not how.
Yeah,
That is not.
Not
That
how
is
that
not.
works.
That is
and
not the
that,
natural flow of a language.
yeah, and that is chaos in
Mm-hmm.
itself. It is
Yes.
chaos and confusion.
Hmm.
And look at all the
Just
different ways that it spreads, and it's like, whoa, man! And to get caught up and tied in that, it's just,
Doesn't it
it's
say that Leviathan is actually the twisting serpent?
yes, the writing.
yeah, yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, so like that's actually what that serpent does is come in and
Yeah,
twist things around. And do you think
Yeah,
it was Leviathan that was actually in the garden with Adam and Eve?
I don't think that Leviathan was. I think the Nakash is a different entity altogether. Now, were they involved in the same rebellious coup? Yeah, I think
yeah,
They were
that's
buddies.
pretty safe bet. Yeah, particularly because of their proximity. It's interesting you bring up the serpent in the garden, the proximity of those passages. You're just talking a couple of chapters away.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, really, really the next chapter. So, Um,
Hmm.
yeah, and I can't tell you how many times, as just a superficial reading of Genesis, I would have never, I wouldn't have picked that up. I wouldn't have been looking for a twisting, writhing chaos dragon doing battle with God in the void before creation.
Yeah.
Um,
Right there, hidden in plain sight.
It just made
inside,
me think, like
Yeah.
chaos, he separated the light from the darkness, right? Like he actually
Mm-hmm.
separated the chaos, but then it made me think like that's actually what the Nahash did.
Yeah.
Was he twisted the words of God to make them believe a lie that
certainly.
they weren't made in his image.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's
They
fascinating.
at least embodied similar attributes.
Oh yeah. And it's like what better tactic than to get so close to the real thing and just tweak it, I
Mhm.
had a conversation last week with a friend, and we were talking about artificial intelligence and all these things, and we were on this topic of everything is built and its purpose is the gospel. It is Jesus. And we sat there and thought about it like, okay, because it seems like a lot of these things get used for evil and have such great potential for evil.
Mhm.
But it's like, what if you just, because apparently you can translate Bible, you can just tell it to translate the scripture into any language. And
Mhm.
so it has there's the potential in it. And because even like money and things like that, I've had this grid of, well, that's bad, or that's evil. Marketing is another one. Make people think they need something so you can sell it to them. But there's something to it. And he said, if you have a tree and you're using an axe to chop it down, what if I show up with a chainsaw? Is that bad? I'm like, oh, no, you just like cut the time. It's a fraction of the time to get the job done.
Right.
But it is like, it's almost like there's not good and evil. There's the intent behind it. And everything has the potential for redemptive purposes.
Mhm. That's very
Just
true.
about.
Yeah. Um, I'm concerned about the Neuralink stuff that's being developed.
Yeah.
I don't really like the idea of chips in the brain and
No,
That's a
transit.
hard pass for me
that
though.
one is for me too. Yeah.
I like
But
my brain.
at the same time, it, that same technology could potentially fill in a gap of neurons in a quadriplegic, and they might be able
Yeah.
to walk and move for the first time in their life.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mhm.
there are, like you say, there are definitely good uses of that, but almost anything can be weaponized.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is kind of what happened all along. Like
Yes,
Oldest
precisely.
trick in the book.
yeah,
Yeah.
you
Precisely.
weaponized something that was actually
This makes me, just talking about it makes me more conscious. I'm just thinking in like day to day going about my business,
Oh,
the
sure.
consciousness of what I speak, what I say, what I do.
Hmm.
Everything has the potential for growth or for progress, to say like you can judge it, like let there be light, or is this something that I can use for good or speak life into it?
Mm-hmm.
And it's everywhere because everything's a choice,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, it's fascinating.
not to just jump ship, but I wanted to talk about Jonah.
I got that one a little bit. I got that one a little quicker. Man,
Will you go into that about
Jonah.
the Kraken? Yeah.
Oh well, Daniel brought that up. Our pastor. Um. Oh my gosh, I'm trying to remember.
It was interesting about like when Jonah was going to go to Nineveh,
Mm-hmm.
then he was like, absolutely not, I'm out.
But later on in the New Testament, was it like a city, and there was like this known, like this is the Kraken is here, like a town that I can't remember the story.
Was it Joppa?
Yes, it was. See, you know it better than I do.
Maybe, but maybe not.
Well, the Kraken does show up in Joppa in Clash of the Titans.
Yeah, but was that like a known thing back in the day? Was that like an entity that?
Not
In ancient history?
not the a version of Leviathan or the Typhon would have been,
Typhon.
because Joppa was a Phoenician city. Uh, the serpent Yam would have been their variety of it,
Hmm.
Hmm.
or or Yom, is it Loton? One of those. Anyway, they had their own variant of it. But the
At
Kraken,
Joppa, they did.
Kraken is actually Norse mythology, but it's essentially the same thing. It looks more like the Hydra octopus sort of variety, but it's again you're dealing with the same motif, the same variation.
But that was, you know,
It's kind of like the serpent mounds. Everybody has an octopus somewhere, or everybody has a kraken. It's just kind of a different name or form.
Mm-hmm.
So, question, like old timers, would they like, I mean, I guess I don't fully know the history of like the engagement with the water animals or, you know, all of that stuff. Would they be like hyper aware of all of that? Like, or would they like, do they sacrifice before they go out and fish? Or
Oh,
like,
sure. Yeah, the pagan traditions definitely would have done things like that. They were inordinately. If you were working out on the sea, again, keeping in mind just how stark an image of chaos that was in the ancient mind.
Mm-hmm.
If you were doing workout on that, there were all kinds of rites and talismans that you would take with you, and prayers to different gods and offerings that you would give to different gods that were associated with the sea. So yeah, there would be no end of that sort of thing. You know, the original superstitious sailor dates back to the earliest mariners in this part of the world.
it really, honestly, I was just triggered about the thought when Jesus was walking on the water and it was so chaotic.
Oh, yeah.
Like, was he actually meeting the Leviathan?
That in within the last 10 years, there have been a number of Canaanite ritual sites that have been found at the bottom of the Sea of Galilee. Well, I say bottom, but closer to the other side, the eastern side of the Sea of Galilee. And the sea is even mentioned as the Sea of Kinneret in I want to say it's part of the Baal cycle, and Baal does battle with um, the Yom, the serpent, basically the Phoenician Canaanite version of the serpent in part of this cycle. And Baal, of course, is the storm god of the Ugaritic pantheon, the Canaanite Phoenician pantheon. And he's equated, you know, his identity is given away in the New Testament as Satan. So Jesus,
yeah,
he's so unbothered by that that he's asleep on a cushion in the rear of the boat.
I know.
And it wasn't just one boat; there were multiple boats. This was a flotilla of not just his disciples, but there were other, you know, not just the immediate 12, but there were other disciples that were following. And the storm comes up because you've got, you know, the natural end of it is that you've got mountains, one of which is almost 12,000 feet tall, that surround the Sea of Galilee. So it's below sea level. So you've got this weird pressure system that gets just instantaneous, you know, storms come out of nowhere all the time there. And so the timing here undoubtedly was some manipulation on the part of Baal, Satan in this case.
No
And
doubt.
God, or Jesus says, you know, basically tells them, you guys have been following me this whole time. You see me raise the dead and we just got through, you know, driving demons out, you know, you've seen me do that. You've seen me raise the dead, heal the sick, make blind people see. And what else do you need? And he quiets the storm with a word.
Yeah.
So he's going toe to toe with not just Bill, but the chaos spirit that's associated, long associated with that particular lake.
So,
And he's got a history of doing that too. That video you sent me the other day of the plagues,
Mhm.
of God directly confronting like gods. What was it like?
the Egyptian
The
gods.
Egyptian gods through those plagues, through the specific plagues of him just like freaking like fronting them like head on. It's amazing. And he does
Yeah.
that all the time.
When Moses recounts God's words that where he says, I'm embattled, or I'm at war with the gods of Egypt this very day. That's not hyperbole. That's not. He's putting these things in their place.
Yeah.
It's so brilliant, though.
Yeah, it is.
You know, because growing up in church, they really screwed that story up for me. They did. It was just like God being so savage towards people, and he hates people. And anyways, but for it to be so pointed.
None of that makes any sense. You know, like in the just the superficial reading, you know, like the conquest. Well, go in and kill every man, woman, and child, and all the oxen, and and you find out that these places are giant enclaves. There's a specific reason, because not only had those bloodlines been polluted, but they were culturally polluted. They were spiritual. They had sold themselves completely over to the gods of the nations. So there was a specific reason. It wasn't. Otherwise, Yahweh would look like, you know, any of a dozen jealous desert gods.
Yeah, he would be like the rest of them.
Yeah, which is the real trick. That's the twist. That's the twisting of him.
It makes me think, though, like if you had fully given yourself over to that, how it would almost be like mercy, because of how tortured they would actually be.
Yeah, to devote them to destruction.
Yeah, but like you know, I've seen certain demon possessed people, and they literally look miserable. Like it's like they can't even.
They're not there.
They're not there.
Yeah,
they're soulless beings.
Yeah,
and I don't know. I was just in my thought.
And this is like a whole. I mean, I see this is like a whole nother level too. Like, what does that even look like? And like Enoch talks about almost like gene splicing too, with animals and plants and all this crazy stuff.
Listen, they were floating in and out. I mean, with Enoch just going in and out all the time, we hadn't even touched half that stuff.
It was probably, I mean, I'm just like, it probably looked like Orcs, Lord of the Rings. It probably looked like an entirely other world, you know?
Consider for a moment, it's interesting you bring up the orcs and all the nether creatures in Lord of the Rings. Where do you think Tolkien got his inspiration for a lot of this stuff? He couched it in, you know, like Germanic and Anglo-Saxon imagery.
Yeah.
Even the creation of Arda, the earth, follows you read like this. I don't know how Lord of the Rings nerdy you guys are, but if you read the Silmarillion, that's divine council stuff, man. The Iluvatar and all of the celestial beings singing everything into creation. Morgoth is your Satan figure and all of that. It's, you know, to anybody that's been exposed to divine council and knows anything about Tolkien, he had to have clued in.
No doubt.
Oh yeah. But it's fascinating to think like that's what it looks like to me when I'm reading it now too. And even with like Noah and stuff, it's like, no, you didn't wipe us out because you were angry with our behavior. You saved us. It's like when it push comes to shove, backed into a corner, like your grace is sufficient. It's like, him pulling
like,
through.
I got you,
like,
guys.
I got you. Yeah, this ain't gonna take you out.
Yeah, man.
What a relief that is. But
I'm so fascinated about like the I don't know. I'm very fascinated by Leviathan.
Yeah.
Just the serpent entity in and of himself, and
and how the chaos of it, the chaotic and the confusion it feels like too. And just you think about the deep darkness, being lost, like that kind of thing.
Well, it's just so interesting that he pops up so often.
Yeah, it is.
Like,
not always in name either. Like I said, in certain places it's articulated as Leviathan, but in other places it's subtler.
Yeah. And many of them are like that too, like just littered throughout.
Well, and I say that we see it as subtle, but an ancient audience, and specifically an ancient audience in general, an ancient Near Eastern audience, would have understood that without having to mention it. And certainly the Hebrews are part of that ancient Near Eastern cultural milieu.
Yeah.
So we that's what I think is so important about biblical studies, even within the last 10 or 15 years, is that the strides that are being made are taking into more and more into account what that audience believed, thought about from day to day,
Mhm.
why certain things are talked about in scripture, because they would have known it implicitly. They wouldn't have had to
Hmm.
ask. All of that was more culturally relevant in their day.
Yeah.
And that's why I have felt this for a long time, but that it feels like we're actually going back to ancient Christianity, like basically like the grassroots of it, because we're uncovering so much of what they believed, and like
Mhm.
we're actually starting to capture their mind of like, oh, this is what they were experiencing, so that I
Mhm.
think it grows our resolution of
Yeah.
who we are as believers. It's like
Yeah, I think so too.
I can align to your heart because I now fully see it,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
Well, that's why it's important, I think, to read. It's always going to be important to read canon scripture, because that, I mean,
Hmm.
that's God. You want to talk to
Yeah.
God, well, you can
For
pray,
real.
certainly, but you want that explicit word. Well, it's right there in 66 books.
Yeah.
Uh, but I also think that it's important, because of the times that we live in, to read the church fathers too, the patristic literature from the
Yeah.
first 3 centuries of Christianity. This, they understood this stuff, and they were implementing it under the Christian paradigm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
No, this would have been, although it took a slightly different form, the kinds of things we're seeing today wouldn't have been a huge shock to
Mhm.
people like, Irenaeus, or Justin Martyr, or Clement, or any of the big, hot dogs in the early church.
Yeah. They were just so closer to that culture in relation and like time as well,
Right.
as opposed
And
to us, we, with all these new denominations and the world and
hmm hmm
confusion, distraction, I would say.
So if you could, I'm just curious because I am a nerd. Kind of going back into that time period, what would you say is like the top three books, literature that you've read that were just like that was so solid for me that, you know, can you think of anything off the top of your head that like would be
you're
good to
gonna
dive into?
gonna put me on the spot here.
I
Okay.
know, I'm so sorry.
Don't apologize. Don't apologize.
You can send me a via email later because I'm definitely looking into it.
Yeah.
It's hard to pick out like a top three. In any like specific work, I would, two of the guys that I mentioned, Irenaeus and Clement of
Hmm.
Alexandria, I would read. Um, and those are my top two picks. I mean,
I like it.
I would probably start with those. I would start with with Clement and Irenaeus. Well, Polycarp, Irenaeus, they're all like in a direct line of teaching from John the Apostle. So like
Hmm.
they learned under the Johannine school,
Mm.
um,
Oh, that's interesting.
in Ephesus, and so um, Irenaeus, he ends up pretty far afield. He ends up in France, in Lyon, as the bishop there.
Hmm.
Oh wow.
Um, but those are great places to start. But so much of the patristic literature is public domain. People can go to different. You could just punch in early church fathers or patristics or whatever. You're going to find databases that have all of the stuff. and it can be a little, a little overwhelming, because you're like, gosh, here I am trying to get through my Bible study, and this guy wants me to read the early church, early church writings. But they're important because they're not just commentary on the Bible, but they're commentary on the world, a world that was pluralistic in a way that's analogous to what we live in today.
Mm-hmm.
And these are people that were putting the Bible into boots on the ground practice, often not infrequently paying for it with their very lifeblood, because of it. So because of the times that we live in, I think it's a good idea to read a little bit more into the writings of the early church fathers, just because they are such great exemplars. And another interesting thing about early church literature is that almost out of the gate, these thinkers, and they were thinkers, a lot of these guys, like Origen and Tertullian, and I'm saying everybody has to agree with all these. They have, varying theologies. I don't think everybody has to bind everything, that they're saying, but a lot of it is just downright orthodox, biblically orthodox stuff. But a lot of these guys were trained in the same schools and academies that the pagan philosophers that were coming in and writing all of these polemics against these Christians, that they were these weirdos and they met in secret, and they baked babies and bread and ate them in these disgusting rituals. There were just all kinds of tabloid style scurrilous rumors, floating about the church, in those days. It unfortunately, a lot of that translated eventually into persecutions of Christians. And so, but a lot of these guys came from the same schools that the pagan philosophers were trained in. They knew all of the philosophy, so they knew how to argue with these guys. And that's where a lot of the early church literature comes from, is that it's that's why we call it apologetics, because the apologia is a legal defense. So it's fresh and relevant, I think, in a way that few writings in church history are, particularly for the days that we live in now.
So interesting.
Yeah.
I really want to dive into those too, especially coming from the thought of John.
Oh yeah, stemming from him. Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. Well, we've talked about that too. Like even this stuff, like I feel like we're going back to the basics of like true Christianity and everything that comes with it.
Yep.
Knowledge, practicality, everything, relationship with Jesus, like the whole thing, going back to it. And what's cool about technology is it's like available now. It's out there. It's like leaking through. So people that are hungry for whatever it is, it's there. It's like you're saying, we can go to this database and it's all there. The stuff that we're talking about here,
it's just not hidden anymore.
It's not hidden.
So cool.
Yeah. And if there is anything hidden, it's probably not going to be for much longer, whatever that looks like.
Right.
Which will present people with a choice. Because if something shows up, it's a paradigm shift. It's like, oh, this is real. Okay. I better pick something.
Speaking of that, have y'all seen about the that document that came out at is it Voynich manuscript?
No.
It's a manuscript that they found that it is not of any language. No one can decipher it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'm for real. You got to go look at it.
Oh, interesting.
It's like, you said that and I was like, oh yeah, look at that.
Are they able to like date it, like how old it is?
Yeah, it's pretty flippin' old.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Huh.
And they've got like plants that people had never seen before, and
really
animals people hadn't seen. Yeah.
That's interesting.
But nobody can decode it. It's a language people don't know. I bet Dr. Judd could figure it out though.
Yeah.
If you want to get on it.
There's still a few of those hanging around. I saw an article a couple of weeks ago that was actually about a year and a half old, that Linear A, that the Minoans spoke, has they've made significant strides in understanding that, and that's been a total mystery for,
Huh.
well, I say,
So I
well,
have
at
a
least
question.
a mystery for decades.
How do you begin to learn that? How do you
Uh,
decode that? How do you decode language like that?
well, the initial linguistic analysis of, let's say, an undiscovered or heretofore unknown language really starts as a kind of pattern recognition. If there's a writing system, that's what you're going to want to look for first.
Mm.
You're going to look, because oftentimes there will be remnants of those languages in later versions of those. There are all kinds of like Creole and Pidgin languages that develop out of just through the natural development of languages, the historical linguistic track that all of them take. And so it's handy to have a little bit of that, and you do have some of that with something like Linear A, because Linear B that the Mycenaeans wrote in and spoke with, we knew had a pretty good handle on for a while. And so there were some analogs in Linear B that help with Linear A, but it still behaved didn't behave like the other Greek languages, like Linear B, and then the later, dialects of like Archaic and Classical Greek, and then Koine Greek. It didn't exactly behave like those. But it's a painstaking process, and oftentimes the best linguists are like they're really good with puzzles. They may end up being cryptographers.
So kids.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
It's the same sort of thing, that they access is that part of their brain. So I myself have not yet been presented with that task. I'm not sure that I would. Well, I'm not saying that I wouldn't want it. I'm just saying that it would be an inordinate amount of work.
Yeah.
Slow work, but I'm kind of used to that too. So
yeah.
I suppose they said, "Hey, we found these characters at Göbekli Tepe, and we want you to take a look at them." I'd be like, "Okay."
Yeah.
I'll be there in 5 hours.
Oh, yeah.
No.
Yeah.
For real.
Well, it's neat too. Like even the Dead Sea Scrolls. Like it's interesting. Who knows? Is there something else going to come up that reinforces what we already have? I don't know what could be found, because that was kind of a cool thing.
It was, and the timing of it was I would say providential as well.
Oh yeah.
Considering
Hey,
everything that was
I was
going
going to
on.
ask you about that.
Yeah.
So, the Book of Enoch, there's like 3, right? There's 3 different, like,
yes.
So one is like most people would consider that to be the true Book of Enoch, and then you've got other people that wouldn't, or like 2 and 3. Is this right? I could be totally wrong.
Like 1 and 2.
Okay. How do they know that Enoch wrote one and not the other? Like, can you kind of even dive into the Book of Enoch and like some of that?
The Book of Enoch is a Second Temple period piece of literature. Having said that, in my estimation, it is based on much older oral tradition, just like everything else in Hebrew tradition is, because the Hebrews didn't have a written language for a while. We keep moving that date back to when they did, especially after they found the Proto-Sinaitic script in the Western Sinai, which is probably the predecessor to languages like Hebrew, later Hebrew and Phoenician, or Paleo-Hebrew and Phoenician, which are basically indistinguishable. But these represent older oral traditions, in the same way that the Torah was oral for God knows how long. It's just that that it was not, and the timing of their writing in the Second Temple period was pretty providential as well, considering that it heralded, the advent of the coming of the Son of Man.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so the problem is that we don't have anything else that we think that Enoch wrote, and we don't have any. So the conundrum is that you have to take it partially on faith
Mm-hmm.
that Enoch was the source material for this, but also in my mind, anthropologically, it's not that big of a leap to look at it as older oral tradition that's existed for thousands of years.
Yeah.
We have other instances of that happening in other parts of the world, in throughout history. So it just depends on the kind of redundancies for accuracy that are built into the culture, and the Hebrews kept those even when they were even when they did develop a language. Um, you guys are probably familiar with the double and triple and quadruple, covering that the scribes did, of a particular passage as they were writing it out. So those kinds of redundancies ensure that kind of accuracy. But um, who knows? There's stuff that's being found by archaeologists literally every day.
Mm.
We're just, an antechamber away, maybe from, finding the life and adventures of Enoch, or
Yeah.
something like
I can't wait.
another cache of documents,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
waiting to be found.
So I
Yeah.
heard this. I doubt it's true. I don't believe it, to be honest. But I was listening to somebody that they were talking about, the other biblical, well, they're not biblical texts, but like other writings by,
Non-canonical.
yeah. What is that? Um, what's the most
Apocryphal.
famous one? Yeah, but there's one that
Enoch's probably the most famous one, but
I don't know.
Oh,
I just keep thinking Josephus. I don't know why my brain keeps saying his name, but
is it
anyways,
Jasher?
Jasher. Golly,
Yeah.
man. Um, but they were this. I don't know if he was really a historian. Who flipping knows? But but he was saying that there were a lot of books that basically were teaching people how to truly access and connect to the Lord in such a practical way, but that those books have been dismantled, like they've been wiped off. Do you know of any other books like that? Like,
mm,
have you heard of anything like that? Like ancient text?
that give us a better version of how to interact with God than the.
Well, he basically said it was like enhancing the Bible. Like everything was congruent with what has already been given of the Bible.
There's certainly apocryphal material that does that, but I don't know about a specific cache of documents that was
Hmm.
obfuscated or
Okay.
eradicated or locked away in the Vatican or something.
Yeah.
Uh,
That's what
but
we
Be
always say.
careful about the Vatican.
That's what we always say. Get in there.
again, who knows?
Yeah.
But there's, in a way, books like Jasher and Enoch and Jubilees and the Book of Giants and any
Mm.
number of the Genesis Apocryphon, or any number of them that do enhance our understanding of
Yeah.
not just the Old Testament world, but the New Testament world, because a lot of those Essenes probably didn't, mystically, transcend or disappear like all of the modern Gnostics and New Agers would like you to think that the
Hmm.
Essenes were, complete and total mystics. A lot of them probably found their prophecies fulfilled in the person of Jesus and
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
became Christians, because I can attest that there were certainly uh, groups of early Christians that lived around the Upper Galilee area around Mount Hermon and Phineas. There were communities of Ebionites and Elkosites who were related to the traditions of the Essenes. So I know for a fact that there were Essenes that did become Christian.
Hmm. That's so
Hmm.
sweet.
Yeah. There's another book. Is there a book, and I don't know if it's like undiscovered or lost, the War of the Sons of Light versus the Sons of Darkness? Does that ring a bell?
What is it again?
The War of the Sons of Light versus the Sons of Darkness, or against the Sons of Darkness.
That sounds like that does sound familiar. It does sound like it's in the Dead Sea Scroll cache.
I feel like it was mentioned, but it's lost. Like they don't have it.
Yeah.
Um,
Or what we
The
have is such
Vatican has it.
a part of
what
it.
with a small fragment,
Hmm.
so that we have some fragments of it. If it's the book that I'm thinking of.
Hmm. I remember reading about it. It's curious. It's like, well, maybe that's one that'll open up in the near future, or they'll uncover it. Who knows? Well,
Oh yeah, it is. It is a Dead Sea Scroll.
I was
yeah,
thinking, yeah,
but it's like fragmented, like you're saying. What
Well,
a
that's
title, though.
fascinating.
Yeah,
I've
what a
never heard
title,
of that.
though. Yeah, what is that? I don't know.
It's a Christian eschatology that came out of the Second Temple Jewish eschatology.
mhm.
Interesting. Well, cool.
Is there anything else crazy, weird, or fun that you want to share?
About the Dead Sea Scrolls.
About anything?
Literally anything and everything.
Oh
Jedi
well,
Master.
this is your ship. You guys are steering. You ask.
No, I jumped.
Yeah,
I already did what I wanted with Leviathan. I really wanted to get into that. So
yeah. Well,
Well,
one thing I thought about sending you a box set of Christopher Lee Dracula movies
oh man, I love
just to
those
have.
things.
I
I
thought
love.
about sending that to you. We had that conversation that one time. I was like, if I find it, I will send it to you. I will send it to him.
James has been looking ever since.
Oh man.
Such gold, such gold.
Yes, it is. It
Fortunately,
is.
you can get them on a lot of streaming services, and I do have a number of them in my collection and storage. But the thing I liked about Christopher Lee is when Hammer first started asking him to do the Dracula role, he said he would only do it on one condition. He'd only do it if Dracula got killed every episode, whatever the movie was, and that was his
Yeah.
stipulation on all of them. He said, because this has to be a morality tale. This has to
Yeah.
be good triumphing over evil.
Yep. Yeah, it's great. I respect him very much. I figured if I've ever found that, I'll send it. I'll send you a little copy of it or whatever. I'm a sucker for that kind of stuff. When I was a kid, I had Batman 1989 on VHS.
Yeah,
Had
me too.
that and the original trilogy Star Wars movies.
Yep.
And I recently found them just at like thrift shop. And I have Batman. It's just got the bat symbol on it.
Uh-huh.
And Star Wars, the original trilogy, before they edited it out, updated it.
Yeah.
And what's funny, I went to get my haircut. I have a lot of haircut stories too.
It's weird.
I went to get my haircut a couple weeks ago, and the girl that was cutting my hair sold her original trilogy to the store that I bought it from. AKA,
No.
I bought her original trilogy, Star Wars. We got on that topic, and she's like, "That's where I like gave mine away to." And I was like, "Well, I'm pretty sure I have them now."
Yeah.
So funny.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Anyways,
One thing I did think of, sort of segueing from Star Wars into my own Jedi Academy.
yeah.
I teach classes on this stuff, and
Mhm.
like just days ago, I finished the last updates to the platform, and people can take one of 6 programs. I've got 6 programs on this stuff. The really hot one is the pertinent one that we've been talking about tonight. It's well, Derek Gilbert calls it my monsterology program, but it's preternatural morphology, and it
Oh,
covers the perspective on vampires and werewolves and
yeah.
witches, ghouls, and things like that. And I also have ancient Near Eastern civilization and Mediterranean civilization for people that want to study that. And biblical demonology, world
Yeah.
mythology, and the flagship program is biblical anthropology, which is kind of a general cultural historical study of the biblical world.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I want to take them as well. And that's what's so cool about this too. It's just like in the dream, this is your wheelhouse. There's so much understanding in it. And even like my situation with the witchcraft stuff up here, it gives me an understanding of like that side of it.
Certainly.
It's like the practicality of it, the supernatural history of it, just all of it is just, it overlaps.
I teach a class on several classes on witchcraft, actually, on the history of witchcraft. We use
That's cool.
Montague Summers's exhaustive book on the subject.
Yeah.
Whose book?
Montague Summers. He was kind of an eccentric clergy, eccentric in the way that exceptionally brilliant people usually are, I guess.
Yeah. But, is it Lives of the Necromancers? Is that one of the
Lives of the Necromancers is one of the textbooks. That's the intro class.
Okay. I'm reading that one right now.
A good one. The author is Mary Shelley's father, William Godwin.
Really?
Yep.
Oh, interesting.
Whose birthday was Mary Shelley, whose birthday was yesterday, as a matter of fact.
Really?
That's funny.
Mary Shelley, Frankenstein.
Yeah.
Whose novel Frankenstein should be required reading for every person going into medicine, the hard sciences.
Oh yeah. I read that in 3rd grade. It was a hard read for a 3rd grader, but it was good though.
Every word.
Yeah. It's a responsibility. Yeah. Trying to replicate God's. Yeah, it's interesting.
Mm-hmm. I do have a book that's coming out fairly shortly called The Van Helsing Way that I've been sort of working on. And this is what happens when you're working on half a dozen projects at the same time. You end up with 3/4 finished books and half finished books. And so I've re-edited some stuff in it. I'm planning to have that ready for this month sometime.
So very cool.
That book actually does cover a lot of the kind of stuff that we're talking about tonight. It falls very much in line with the preternatural morphology program that I teach through the Institute.
It's awesome. Well, everybody go check it out.
Yes, for sure.
BurtonBeyond.net/IBA.
Say it one more time.
BurtonBeyond.net/IBA.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us tonight. It is always a delight to have you on.
It is.
I feel like my brain just deflated.
It's fun for me to do. It's fun for me to do.
Very cool. All right. We will see y'all next time. If you enjoyed this episode of the Ancient Way podcast, drop us a like, share with your friends, share with your family. And if you'd like to support us and what we are doing, and you would like to play a direct role in our growth and things that we do in the future,
we have a donation spot at the bottom of our show notes. So you can click on that, give however much you want. We appreciate absolutely everything. We appreciate our listeners. And everybody that's already come alongside and encouraged us, and even everybody that's been on our show. So thanks, guys.